They appear to be winning, but God is already moving. It may seem like they got away with it, the manipulation, the deception, the betrayal so heartless you had to sit in silence just to avoid shattering. They tore your name apart behind your back, smiled in your face while wounding you spiritually, and walked away without a trace of remorse, almost as though they were victorious. But let this be clear. No one escapes divine accountability, neither in this life nor in the one to come. God may seem silent, but he is never absent. His justice doesn't crave attention. It arrives subtly, shaking the very core of the wicked. You may not always witness it, but when God begins to respond, when he starts reclaiming what was misused, mistreated, and misunderstood, he does so in ways that pierce the soul. So while the narcissist parades a facade of success, what they can never hide is this: their karma is already in motion. The harm they inflicted is coming full circle, not as vengeance, but as divine consequence. They might appear happier than ever, but it's all a charade. They'll smile like they've been liberated, laugh louder, walk with pride, and present a version of themselves to the world that looks whole, healed, and untouched. Their social media turns into a stage uplifting captions, cafe selfies, and declarations about new beginnings and self-love. At first glance, it can be difficult to comprehend. After all they put you through, lies, manipulation, gaslighting, betrayal, this is what they get: applause, a platform, a sense of freedom. And if you're not firmly anchored in truth, your heart might start to sway. The enemy whispers, "Look at them. They're thriving without you. Maybe it really was your fault. Maybe you were the weight holding them down." But here's the truth. The narcissist happiness isn't healing. It's a disguise. It's not transformation. It's a desperate performance to maintain control of the narrative they've created for themselves and others. Because no one walks away from someone who loved them genuinely and finds peace. Not when that love was drenched in prayer, in patience, in divine grace. You weren't just someone in their life. You were a shelter, a spiritual shield. You were the one who stood in spiritual warfare for them when they were oblivious to the battles waging around them. You were their intercessor, their anchor, their final thread connecting them to the divine. And they disrespected it, they misused it, they mocked it. So now they overcompensate. They try to laugh louder than the guilt. They attempt to glow brighter than the shame. They run into new connections trying to replicate what they ruined. But the reality is undeniable. You cannot substitute what God sent with something man-made. You cannot manufacture peace with pleasure. You cannot mute conviction with chaos. And you certainly can't drown out God's voice by turning up the volume on Instagram. That smile they flaunt, it fades when the camera's off. That glow they fake, it dims in the solitude of their conscience. Because regardless of their public display, they sleep at night with a soul that remembers. They know what they lost. They may never confess it, not to others, not even to themselves, but they feel it. They feel it when blessings fall flat. They feel it when they look into someone new's eyes and don't see the same light they saw in yours. They feel it when they reach for support and are met with emptiness. They feel it when they wish for prayer but have no one who knows how to kneel in spiritual warfare for them. They feel it when they try to erase you from memory but can't, because the truth isn't easily forgotten. You can't walk away from divine protection, mock sacred love, and come away unscathed. Galatians 6:7 says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows." The narcissist isn't reaping joy. They're harvesting denial, and denial always feels comforting, like a warm blanket on a cold night, until the storm arrives. And when that storm hits, It strips away every illusion. You'll know it's happening when their volume increases, when their updates become excessive, when they try too hard to appear serene. Real peace doesn't make announcements. Real healing doesn't require spectators. When God restores someone for real, they don't broadcast it. They radiate it. So when you see them performing perfection, do not envy. Do not desire their storyline. Do not for a moment believe they are escaping the consequences of what they've done, because while they may fool the world, they cannot fool God. And they certainly cannot deceive their own soul. That's why they keep acting, because deep within they sense the void. And it's not just your absence, it's who they were when they had you. That version of themselves, the one covered by your intercession, nurtured by your grace, uplifted by your prayers, that person is gone. What remains is an empty actor, a curated image. You, on the other hand, are now rooted in truth. You're healing in unseen ways. You're discovering joy that isn't loud, but deeply grounded. You're growing in the stillness of God's presence. Quietly, profoundly, and permanently, you're finding peace in whatever form you encounter, as you hold your ecstasy in the... So let them perform, let them play their role, let them build their persona. But understand this, God is not interested in performances. He sees beyond the surface, he looks at the heart. And while the crowd may be applauding, God may already be lowering the curtain. One day that performance will end. The mask will fall. The clapping will stop. And all that will remain is the truth, the very truth they tried so hard to outrun. And by then, it will be too late to reach back for what they discarded. Because by then, you will no longer be within reach. God then starts reclaiming what they once held so carelessly. There's a dangerous misconception many live under, the belief that God's mercy means he won't intervene, that just because there was no immediate consequence when they lied, betrayed, abandoned, or ridiculed your loyalty, maybe they escaped, maybe God didn't notice, maybe there's no divine retribution. But that's not how the kingdom of heaven operates. God isn't blind, God isn't slow, and God certainly is not mocked. When someone mistreats what God entrusted to them, when they downplay the value of a heart that remained when others ran, a spirit that interceded for them during storms they created, and a love that bled while forgiving, it doesn't go unanswered. Divine justice doesn't always descend as fire from the skies. Sometimes it shows up as a quiet, deliberate, and holy subtraction. God begins to retrieve what they never honored. At first, they don't even realize it. That's part of the judgment. God lets them believe they're still in charge. But gradually, everything begins to shift. People they relied on begin to drift. The ease they once had in navigating relationships becomes filled with resistance. The favor they once enjoyed in finances, social settings, and influence starts to fade, not through catastrophe, but through calculated divine withdrawal. A friend suddenly stops responding. A door that always opened suddenly remains shut. Opportunities begin to dissolve with no explanation. Then comes isolation. Because God doesn't have to expose someone publicly to correct them thoroughly. He just removes the grace they were standing under, the same grace they failed to appreciate, and that grace flowed through you. You weren't just a friend, partner, or spouse. You were a divine vessel, a covering, a spiritual shelter. You stood in the gap, shielding them from battles they couldn't even see. When they dishonored you, they weren't just offending a person. They were dishonoring the God who placed you in their life. That isn't a trivial misstep. That's spiritual arrogance. And arrogance always precedes destruction. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble." When someone walks away from his grace, and even worse, treats it with contempt, he allows them to experience life without it. The punishment isn't always chaos. The punishment is the absence of divine order. They once experienced peace without asking, because you brought it. They had someone praying over them because you labored spiritually. They had loyalty but dismissed it as weakness. They had stability but called it monotony. They had real, sacrificial love and treated it like a burden. So God stepped back. And now they're realizing that what's gone isn't just you, it's what God was doing through you. And that can't be replaced. They try, oh how they try. New connections, new distractions, new pursuits. But nothing fits. Because the gap is spiritual, the absence is sacred. And until they come to a place of true humility, until repentance reaches their soul, God will keep removing. He'll continue subtracting until they comprehend. You don't get to keep what you refused to value. And here's the mercy, because even in correction, God is merciful. He doesn't strip everything away at once. He gives time. He gives space to realize, to repent, to return. But if they don't, if pride locks their heart and blinds their eyes, then the unraveling will continue, and they will sit among the ruins of what could have been a redemptive story, but instead will stand as a sobering warning. If you're watching this and still grieving the relationship, the friendship, the connection they walked away from, breathe. Let God be God. You don't have to convince them of your worth. God already knows your value, and He's showing them now, not through arguments, not through explanations, but by subtraction. Every loss they experience now will echo your absence. Every door that shuts in their face will whisper of the ones you held open. Every wave of confusion will carry the sobering truth. They had something rare, something sacred, and they lost it. And what about you? You don't need to fight for clarity. You don't have to run after closure. You don't need to prove anything. You just have to heal. You just have to stay aligned with God. Because while He is removing from them, He is restoring you. He is multiplying where you were depleted. He is sowing where you were stripped. He is building where they tried to break you. So, move forward. Walk in faith. Walk in the assurance that heaven witnessed it all. God has begun retrieving what they once held carelessly, and He is preparing to replace what you gave sacrificially with something you'll never have to plead to be valued again. Comment below with the words, "God saw it all, and He's already removing what dishonored me." Let that be your declaration. I will not grieve what God has taken. I will rejoice in what He is restoring. They talk in circles now, but somehow you're still at the core of every sentence. They'll never say your name, not directly, not publicly, not in front of others. Because saying your name would require honesty, and honesty demands humility. And humility is something the narcissist abandoned long ago. Instead, they speak in symbolism, in cryptic captions, in lyrical posts meant to inflict pain without ever accepting accountability. At first glance, it may sound like growth, like they're reflecting, processing, evolving. But if you listen not with your ears, but with your spirit, you'll hear it, the echoes of you, shards of your story, twisted into vague statements about betrayal, about fake people, about protecting their peace. And if you know them, and you do, you'll recognize the undertone. You'll feel the guilt in the cadence. Because those words are not symptoms of healing, they are remnants of haunting. The narcissist cannot stop circling around what they claim they've moved beyond. They cannot stop revolving around your memory. They use language as armor, narratives as shields, and distance as denial. But what they cannot do, what they'll never be able to do, is speak of you without feeling a tremble deep within. Because no matter how far they run, you remain the reflection they can't shatter. You are the living reminder of the version of themselves they abandoned, the one who once touched something true and broke it. They say things like, "Some people just don't deserve me," when the truth is, they never knew how to appreciate someone who saw them fully and loved them anyway. They say, "I've learned to love myself," when really, they've just learned how to avoid facing the shame of losing someone sacred. They say, "Not everyone is meant to stay in your life," when in reality they were the one who walked away from the very thing God was trying to use to heal them. You were never just another chapter. You were the fork in the road, the moment of potential transformation, the point where they could have evolved, could have matured, could have become more than the carefully guarded image they protect so fiercely. And now that you're truly gone, the silence they once longed for is suffocating them. Silence is sacrificial before any union, and the vanquished, because narcissists don't grieve people, they grieve power. They don't miss you. They miss the way they felt in your presence. They miss the admiration, the constant emotional safety net, the loyalty, the prayers, the grace. But now, with your light, your prayers, your spirit withdrawn, they are lost. They won't say it aloud, but it bleeds through everything they avoid saying clearly. It shows in the stories they still watch, in the cryptic posts meant to bait your attention, in the passive lines only you would understand. Not because they desire reconciliation, but because your silence is a thunderclap in the echo chamber of their ego. That's what torments someone who builds their life on illusion, the silence of the one who always spoke the truth. They may still be trying to revise the script. They may tell others you were too much, too intense, too dramatic. They may recast the narrative to look like they fled toxicity. But no matter how they edit the storyline, the truth slips through. They are still speaking of you because they are still haunted by you. And they will be for a very long time. Because when someone tosses away a soul God sent, someone full of compassion, intercession, and patience, they don't just lose a person. They lose the part of themselves that was healing in that presence. And that loss, it cannot be substituted with a new romance, a promotion, or a change in scenery. They'll keep posting, they'll keep hinting, they'll keep whispering lies to themselves, but no one lies louder than someone unwilling to accept the truth. And no one performs harder than someone being eaten alive by spiritual conviction. That's why their words sound so hollow, because they are. They speak in spirals, not to process pain, but to evade responsibility, not to find clarity, but to maintain control. Yet, somehow, despite all that spinning, you're still at the center, because your absence has become the anchor of their world. They orbit around a scar they can't heal, a reality they cannot erase. But you're free now. You no longer have to defend your heart. You don't have to explain your exit. You don't need to respond to their noise. Because when someone continues to speak in coded circles while pretending they've moved on, it says one thing clearly: they left you, but they've never stopped carrying you. And now something even deeper is unfolding. They no longer believe in others, and quietly they've stopped believing in themselves. It starts subtly. They claim they're just being more mindful. They act like they've grown wise. They use words like boundaries, discernment, protecting my energy. They say things like, "I don't trust easily anymore," or people always disappoint. But underneath the confident tone, behind the practiced detachment, is a fragile truth. They're not setting boundaries, they're building walls. And not because the world betrayed them, but because they betrayed someone who never deserved it. And now they can't trust anyone who reminds them of the one they hurt. What they don't see, or won't admit, is that their fear isn't truly about others. It's about themselves. Because once you've hurt someone good, someone pure, someone sent by God, once you've looked into their eyes and turned away with cold indifference, once you've burned down the shelter they built around your storm, you begin to question your own soul. And slowly, that internal questioning turns into suspicion, not just of others, but of your own intentions, your own judgment, your own capacity for connection. You start living with the quiet, gnawing belief that everyone is as disloyal as you were, that everyone will manipulate, pretend, and leave. That's a punishment that doesn't come from a courtroom or a scandal. It comes from the conscience. It's self-inflicted, a slow, aching corrosion of identity, a steady unraveling of peace. They used to be vibrant, charismatic, easygoing, confident. But now, the tone has shifted. There's hesitation in their voice. There's uncertainty in their posture. There's tension in their words, even if it's hidden beneath sarcasm, wit, or self-deprecating humor. They pause before sharing. They question every compliment. They analyze every silence. Not because others are untrustworthy, but because, deep down, they know what they did when someone trusted them completely. That is divine justice. Not dramatic collapse, but quiet decay. Not outer ruin, but inner rust. They are now suspicious of kindness because they once weaponized it, wary of honesty because they twisted it, fearful of love, not because it failed them, but because they failed it. And what was once a strong self-assurance is now hollow pride, built on a crumbling foundation. Because when you betray the one God assigned to protect you, when you mock the presence of God working through someone's life, the aftermath isn't always exposure. It's emptiness. They're surrounded by people now, but they feel isolated. They receive praise, but it doesn't satisfy. They seek affirmation, but it doesn't reach their heart, because none of it can compete with the quiet, persistent voice inside that whispers, "You broke something holy." That voice isn't loud, but it's constant, and in the silence it swells. And the strange thing? It sounds a lot like you. Not your words, but your presence. That still, merciful, grounded energy you carried. It was the last place they felt truly safe. And now? No matter how many people surround them, no matter how many ways they reinvent themselves, they cannot reproduce what your presence gave them. Not because you were perfect, but because God was present in you. And now that you're gone, that presence is gone too. They isolate, they withdraw, not as a conscious decision, but as a reflex. Because somewhere deep within, they know they no longer deserve what they once carelessly rejected. And that realization doesn't just hurt, it binds. It becomes a chain around their soul. It's not simply loneliness, not merely regret. It's the terrifying suspicion that they are now unreachable, even to themselves. Because when you stop believing in others, the final and most devastating consequence is that you begin to stop believing in the possibility of who you might have become. And that's the heartbreak. They didn't just lose you. They lost a future version of themselves, the healed, redeemed, softened version that could only grow under the kind of love you gave. A love that was patient, a love that was sacred, a love that was rooted in God. That version of themselves, it's gone, and they will never meet that version again. There's a very specific kind of justice that doesn't come through confrontation, punishment, or exposure. It doesn't arrive as public humiliation. It comes through reflection. Not emotional reflection, literal reflection. It comes when God allows someone to face the exact version of themselves they tried to hide, to excuse, to justify. Except this time, that reflection appears in someone else. Someone who treats them exactly the way they once treated you. At first, they don't recognize it. In fact, they're drawn to this new person with intensity. The chemistry is magnetic, the attention intoxicating. They feel pursued, understood, chosen. Everything they once made you feel during that blissful honeymoon stage. They tell people, this one is different, this one really gets me. And for a while, it truly seems like they've found what they were missing. And for a while, it truly seems like they've found what they were missing. But they haven't found a soulmate. They've met their mirror. And the justice? It's not swift. It doesn't crash down like thunder. It creeps in, calculated, quiet, and precise. That's what makes it devastating. It begins with tiny jabs, subtle criticisms, slight rejections of their insecurities. Then it escalates. The other person starts playing emotional games. One day they're present, affectionate, invested. The next day cold, distant, completely unbothered. One week they're planning a future together. The next, they vanish for hours, sometimes days. Suddenly, the narcissist is walking on eggshells. They're questioning their worth, wondering what they did wrong, anxiously scanning messages for signs of affection, trying to fix things without knowing what's broken. And in those fragile, painful moments, something begins to rise in their soul. A memory, and a face, a realization. This is what I did to them, and it floods back. The texts they ignored while you cried alone. The nights you sat in silence, hoping they'd come around. The confusion they caused, the way they made you doubt your reality, question your value, beg for clarity. The way you tried again and again to be understood, only to be dismissed. And now, they are you. Except they don't have your grace. They don't have your patience. They don't carry the God-given capacity you had to love past betrayal. The person they're dealing with now, they're not praying for them. They're not covering them. They're not forgiving 70 times 7. The person they're with now is just like them, cold, manipulative, self-serving, and emotionally indifferent. And suddenly, they're not just remembering, they're reliving. They now know what it feels like to be adored one moment and forgotten the next, to be judged instead of supported, to be used for validation and discarded for convenience. And the people around them don't notice the irony. No one makes the connection. But they do. They connect every unanswered message to the ones they once ignored from you. Every sarcastic remark to the ones they used to weaponize against your vulnerability. Every emotional withdrawal to the moments they left you stranded in your own pain. This is the full circle moment. This is where God doesn't send thunder or fire. He doesn't need to. He simply allows the narcissist to sit in the same storm they once created. And here's where it gets piercing. To them, it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like heartbreak, because they lack the humility to see the lesson. They don't see discipline, they see betrayal. They don't recognize divine correction. they only feel misfortune. But it's not cruelty. It's mercy, because God doesn't crush to destroy. He mirrors to awaken. He allows the reflection, not for revenge, but for revelation. And when the mirror is finally held up, even they can't escape the image staring back. They will try. They'll claim the other person has issues. They'll complain about their bad luck in relationships. They might even start calling themselves the victim. But late at night, when the pride wears thin and the lights are off, they hear it in unity. That voice, the quiet voice. This is who you were. This is what you did. This is how they felt. And in that moment, there is no one left to gaslight, no one to manipulate, no one to rewrite the script for. Because the person they're with now doesn't care enough to cushion the truth. They're not invested enough to protect fragile feelings. And for the first time, the narcissist is powerless. Not because they've lost control of someone else, but because they've lost control of the story. There's no narrative left where they're the victim. No version where they come out clean. The pain is too real. The source is too familiar. They see themselves in this person, and they hate it. But more than hate, they fear it. Because if they stay, they suffer. If they leave, they admit it. Either way, the truth cannot be undone. They are now living with the consequences of their own reflection. And you're not there to see it. You're not hovering, waiting for karma. You're not hoping for vengeance. You're long gone, healed, whole, and held by a God who makes all things right without the need for a crowd. That's the true weight of divine justice. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream. It mirrors, and when God allows someone to be undone, not by destruction, but by their own reflection, that's not retaliation. After mercy, mercy wrapped in consequence. Redemption disguised as heartbreak. Restoration brought forth through revelation. They once laughed at how much you cared. Now they cry over someone who couldn't care less. They once rolled their eyes at your tears. Now they're being told they're too sensitive for asking for love. They once held your heart like it was replaceable. Now they're pleading with someone to stay, someone who won't even give them eye contact. And somewhere, in the deepest silence of that private unraveling, the truth settles like dust after a storm. You were never the problem. They were looking into a mirror the whole time. They just didn't realize it until now.